upgrade, migrate, repeat. Is there an alternative? So what's behind the title? So, oh, I can't read that. It's tiny, isn't it? So yeah, have you ever been through that process of migrating a website, and it's just quite painful, isn't it, between major versions? I think Bianca was just saying a minute ago that 7 to 8, they know it was a painful experience, and we've probably all been there. So, so I'm sure you've had that experience as well. And you might have found that it included those no longer supported property editors. So, okay, most of your stuff's moved across, but now what do we do? There's some nods in the audience. I'm not alone in having been there. That's good to know. And yeah, did you just have that feeling it was just a more convoluted process than you'd expected it to be on the surface? It was going to be simple, but oh, this is getting a bit of a drag in places. Yeah. So basically, I think we've all been there. What we want to do is have a look at an alternative approach to that sort of multi-step upgrade, then a migration, then another upgrade, then another migration, and just see some of the potential that it opens up. So just though to give us sort of a view of different options, let's have a look at a few. We're going to consider the standard approach, that upgrades and migrations. We're going to look at, just very briefly, at the idea you could just build a new site and then worry about getting the data across manually. Somebody just sits there and copies and pastes and copies and pastes. That can be actually a valid answer. But then there's this last option, really. Do a completely new site build and then somehow automatically get the content across. So you can probably see where this is heading. Okay, so yeah, the standard approach of upgrades and migrations. Going between the major versions, there's a whole series of things to take into account. So from version 7 to 8, there's a really large change in the code base. So there's lots of things that need to be recoded. There's a migration. Again, from 8 to 9, we're moving from the .NET framework across to .NET Core. Well, I think I should be calling it .NET 5 or 6 now, shouldn't I? But I still think of it as .NET Core. Yeah, we've got to decouple the .NET framework. We've got to update all our views and everything. So, and then there's a database migration. So if we're going through this step of going through all those versions, we probably end up rewriting bits of code multiple times just to make sure we've got everything working. Now going forward, hopefully we're expecting that to become easier, but as we just heard a minute ago in the questions and answers, there's no guarantee there won't be breaking changes in the future either. So we might get probably hopefully not the pain between 7 and 8, but we might hit some pain points as well in the future. So yeah, that standard approach has all these sort of definite step-off points and probably a few others. I've left a few spurs on that diagram because we found in some projects there'll be a dependency on some other package, and that will have a point. We found that we had to break off at 8.6 and do another upgrade because of another dependency, and that's going to be the case as well. So we got all those, this journey of many steps. And of course we come down to all these packages. I'm sure you all recognize the icons from some of these awesome packages that we've been used to using over the years. I'm sure lots of them, I'm seeing some smiles, so they are familiar. So yeah, I mean, archetype, Vorto, nested content, there's a whole load of things that we've been using that just filled a need. And they were fantastic in version 7. And that was brilliant to work with, but now we're coming to do this migration, and how do we get that data across? It suddenly can become a bit painful. So there's a number of pitfalls, really. We found that with this type of project, the duration was one pitfall. It just ended up being quite a long project because we're doing code changes, content changes, code changes, content changes to make sure that everything's moved across clearly. Is the microphone not working very well?
Yeah, a bit quiet.
A bit quiet. If I hold it, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do this. Does everybody hear better now? Yeah, thumbs up at the back. That's a good sign. Okay, and then complexity. You know, those major version changes, there can be complexity that's just not expected. We found if you're doing a content freeze because you know your clients need to stop while the content's updated. If you've got a long duration project just to get that across, then that content freeze is too long. And if you've got a a large site with lots and lots of content that's being updated regularly, and they're the ones that we want to do the migrations on, aren't they? Then that content freeze is just going to be prohibitive. It's a very manual process, and that introduces a chance of errors because, and we found on some of these upgrades we had to have all these copies at different points and then sometimes roll back because we realized after the event we hadn't quite got something right. That's always going to be the case. And this was the big one for us. You become locked into what's potentially an outdated model because this site was built in version 7, so it's probably 5 years old. And you've learned things in that time. The client's learned things in that time. And actually what you're doing is building your content exactly the same way again because you're going through these migrations. And so that for us was quite a big issue with this standard approach. And then the legacy data types we talked about a minute ago with the previous slide with all those icons we recognize. So the second option then is a new site build and manually re-enter the content. And that's great. If you've got a small site, it's a brochureware site, there's not that many pages, it wouldn't take someone very long to copy and paste. Fantastic. But for the types of sites we were looking at with hundreds or more pages of content, large pages of content with lots of detail in, that's just not an option. So we just skip straight on to number 3. So a new site build with automated transfer of the content. So yeah, that's what we really want to talk about as sort of what we found to be a good option. So I'm going to use a case study. We had a client, the Access Group. They have a really large site, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and their pages are full of data. So some of the challenges that we found with this, well, there was a range of page types and editing styles in the CMS. It had grown over time, it had evolved. There was a need for this, a need for that, the constant changes, and now we've got a site that's sort of doing the same thing in different ways in different places. And they have a desire as a client to grow and change quickly, and we wanted to support that with a new site. This project was going from Umbraco 7 to 8. So we wanted to build a new platform with sort of the best practices baked in, those things that we'd learnt and the client had learnt about the way they use the site. We wanted to obviously take the opportunity to change those. And so what we went for was a phased rollout. We were running Umbraco 7 and Umbraco 8 together. It might sound like a strange approach, but actually it worked really well. We used Cloudflare to pick based on the URL and patterns that we could update, which site it was actually taking the content from. So we could add a whole load of new features or page types into Umbraco 8, get them all working just correct. The client could check the content, and then we could steer all those across. Now, to the user visiting the site, they appeared to just be visiting one site. It was seamless. The navigation was the same across. Everything just worked, but technically some of it was coming from 7, some of it was coming from 8, and that gave us a very manageable phased way of moving things across. And the migrating the content to the new platform was part of that. We'll come on to that in a minute. So the outcome, running 7 and 8 concurrently actually turned out to be a really great approach. It was quite an inspired move. Well done, Paul. Importing the content to V8 was really successful. We'll have a look at that in a minute. But it made the whole site feel like a completely new build because we could create new patterns, do things different ways, and benefit from that learning that the client and Moriarm as a team have gone through together. And it provided a nice, stable foundation going forward. So we wanted to really change that editor experience. How are we going to get the content across? Because here we have what looks very dated now, doesn't it? The version 7 back end. And the content there was using the tools that we had available at the time. And we wanted to get it into this version 8 backend where it's all a lot cleaner, making use of the block list. So we created a tool just for the job, and it basically, you can see here a postman screen. We basically created something that could read the content out of 7 and split any piece of content into a tree of nodes. So if you've got a very simple piece of content like a date or a bit of text or just a number, one of those simple data types, well, that would just be one node. But if you've got something like the nested content, then that would be a whole tree of nodes and with a whole lot of data in. So we came up with a way of moving everything into a standard format. That was step 1. And then step 2 is to take that standard format and map it into version 8. And that gives us the opportunity to pretty much move any data anywhere, make use of changing from one format to another. So here we have a little video. Is that playing, or do I have to push the button again? Yeah, it's playing now. Okay, so here we have a little video showing our content in version 7. And here's the front-end page that was being rendered out. You can see there's rows of data. We've got this bullet point carousel type thing here. There's stats counters. You can just picture as the back end, can't you, all the nested content, the embedded content that was being used in version 7 to handle this type of data. And some of that content was nested down to more than one level. I think we had embedded inside. Oh, we're seeing it on the screen here. So we've got a mixture of embedded and nested content sitting together in the back office. So we've sort of got trees within trees of data all within a single page in version 7. And as I said, we'd learned that we wanted to structure this differently in version 8. So we created a fresh version 8 site with the pattern we wanted. Here we can see there's nothing under our digital learning page. And then if we go to our postman and post across a request, we've got all our mapping there in our source body. You can see there's the mapping of how all the fields should move across. Then when we refresh it, the whole page is moved across. And within there we have nested content, block list. Everything now is block list. And within those blocks, there are blocks that contain other elements, and that can be nested down to any level deep. And all the different field types, they're all automatically worked out and are resolved as we move that data across. So we came up with this tool that did just the job we needed for our client, the Access Group. Here we see this complexity just within a single page that could be moved across very quickly with a request through the API that we use to build it. And then the interesting thing here is we have an absolutely identical looking page. The markup's the same, the content is identical. You couldn't tell the difference between one and the other, but in the back office, the experience is completely different. It's been restructured, benefiting from that learning. So the back office experience is completely different, but the front of the site hasn't changed at all. So that just gives you an idea of our learning on that project. So what do we learn from it? Well, we found the technique worked really well. We really liked the way of working because we didn't feel held back or hampered by having to do things the way they've always been done. We were open to do things the way we wanted to, that made more sense from what we'd learned, and we could see an awful lot of potential from it. So that moved on to the decision to make this into a product. So we have Moriyama Elevate. We can elevate our data from one version to another. And so here I'm just going to talk very briefly about sort of the concepts of it. We basically add a plugin, it's a DLL basically, into our version 7 site. We add another DLL that's targeting version 10 into our version 10 site. And they talk to a central core. And then we use a command line. The GUI will come later. We just needed to start with something simple. So the command line interface first of all, to talk to the central core and get it to go and grab data about the structure of all the document types and data types. And then we can tell it to how we want to map them, and then follow that black line at the bottom, push them across. So that's the basic concept of the tool. But underneath it is this idea that whatever type of information we have, we can break it out into a node or a tree of nodes in a sort of standard format, and then take that node or tree of nodes and map them back to potentially something completely different on the other side. So just to give you an idea, here's our command line we can use to help us get some different commands out. We can start off by calling the source system just to check we've got it configured properly and it can identify itself. That's like a little call home, so that's working on our version 7 side. We can do exactly the same on the destination just to make sure we've got it configured correctly and that the central hub can talk to the 10 site. Yeah, that's great, that's working. And then we want to read the structures from those sites. So this is going to go through our version 7 site, and it's going to look at all the document types and all the properties that are in those. And then for any properties that are something like a nested content or embedded content, or there's a whole series of them, it will then look at the configuration for that document type, that property type, and look at data type, isn't it? It'll look at the properties data type, just getting the terms right, and then look at the sub-properties off of that. So if we do exactly the same for the reading the structure for the 10 site, and we get all those back, we hopefully get a load of green ticks that tells us that we've got a way of understanding each of those, that we've written the resolvers for them, so we can immediately see if there's anything missing. And we can see at the top here, we've got an example as a statistics row. That's a document type. And the statistics row document type has a property called statistics. You can see on the second line towards the end, it's identifying itself as being block list. And that block list contains only one possible type of child document type, which is a statistics item. And the statistics item contains 3 properties, a number, a title, and a hide option, which is a Boolean. So we just get an idea that reading the structure, we read the structure into something that's generically understood as this tree of nodes. And then if we know the structure on both sides, we have a way of mapping that data across. So we map the two together. That's the next step, is to get the system to have a look at the structures of both of those, create for us a default map, leave gaps where the answers aren't obvious, but if the document type and the document type's alias and the property type's alias match, it will set those in the map for us ready. And then we can edit that and move on to importing it. So the import wasn't quite ready when I prepared the slideshow. So that's the end of the command line demonstrations, but that last line across the bottom. And that's the bit we've already got in our proof of concept that we did from the Access project that's working really well. So we can see how we'll finish that last part off. So that's the concept that of the Elevate product. So what are some of the use cases? Well, I think the one that we're all probably interested in initially is getting Umbraco V7 to V10 in one step. So you take your existing V7 site, create a brand new V10 site the way you want it to be, the way your clients want it to be, get the setup how you want it, map the data across, move it over. So that's probably the most obvious immediate use case. But exactly the same would apply to cloud. Got those V7 cloud sites, not sure what to do with them, want to move them to 10. There's nothing stopping us taking the same process because this is working with an API. There's nothing to get in the way of the Umbraco deploy, nothing to clash, so no reason why we couldn't use this for cloud as well. We could take content from multiple sources. So if you've got a client that's got sort of a handful of sites and They're probably all built slightly differently, and they've all got content in slightly different ways. And they want to pull that into one site. You can build that one new site the way you want and pull across from multiple sites. And because there's the opportunity to map and restructure your data, then you can now have one coherent website that represents the organization. And that happens a lot, doesn't it, with our clients, that they acquire other companies, or parts of the business handle things differently and they want to centralize. Content from other CMSs. We actually had a need to take content from WordPress and stick it into a blog in an Umbraco site. And there was years of posts in there. So we made some modifications to the tool that we had for the Access project and pulled across a load of WordPress data into Umbraco. Worked really well. But going forward, it's all written in .NET. So what about Sitecore or Optimizely? We've got clients paying, or potential clients paying, enormous licensing fees. And, Umbraco is now a CDXP. We've been hearing that a lot, haven't we? It's competing now with these larger, we've always been seen more as the more enterprise things like Sitecore and Optimizely. So why not give them a tremendous saving and a fabulous user experience all in one go? Pull the data across. That would be something that we could support in the future. As I said before, this was a big one for us. Legacy patterns to new patterns, not having to be hampered by what we had before, but also that goes further in terms of all those document types changing, the property editors changing. So, Vorto content, moving that across seamlessly into language variants, that's just an obvious need, isn't it? So we could handle that with a mapping. There were still sites in version 7 that hadn't started to use the nested and embedded contents and other things like that. Back in the V4 days, the only way to do it was to create a whole load of child pages underneath. They all had their own URL. We had to do something to make them show a not found page or something, and then navigate down them and pull all the data up to the one page to create something. Well, we still come across version 7 sites that are built that way. So when moving the data across and mapping it, we could take multiple pages and move them all into block list content within a single page. So don't need to be stuck or restricted to those legacy patterns. And, actually any data that can describe a node of content and a tree of content, we could potentially use that as an import. So data might come from SQL or JSON or XML and create complex, rich pages in Umbraco. So, what's the roadmap? So alpha testing, we're inviting everybody to register now if you're interested. Particularly looking to support gold partners and MVPs as a priority. But if you're interested, do register. Initially, we're going to be providing it as a service. So we have a service launch Q1 next year. So that's just around the corner. As a service, it's going to be our responsibility to make sure that whatever data you have in your version 7 site, we can resolve and map and get it to your new one. So the service will be you build your new 10 site, get it how you want it, but without any data, and then say, here you go, Moriyama, sort out that mess. So that will be the service launch. And by doing a number of those, and we've already got some interest queued up, and I'm sure there'll be some more, but by doing a number of those, that's going to help us to sort of get the product really solid and then be able to launch it as a product launch, a release that will allow you to do that for yourselves. So that's our roadmap. So do register because interest is high in this. So just in summary, what are we looking at here? Well, we're looking at elevating our Umbraco migrations. We want to make it less effort, less time, and greater flexibility. That's really the takeaways from this approach. So yeah, here's a QR code. Scan that. It gives the link to the register page. If you missed the chance or you're too far back, talk to any of the Umbraco team. There's a few of us here. You all know Warren and Paul and Matt, so talk to any of us. But yeah, we'd love to hear your interest so that we can get those a whole series of migrations prioritised. Yeah, so I've covered that already. Any questions, ask any one of the team. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. Hope that's been of interest. We've really enjoyed the process of going through our proof of concept, coming up with the product, getting it very close to completion, and yeah, hope it's going to be of great help to others in the Umbraco community too. So thank you very much.